This afternoon is Don Burke. Don is a Senior Vice President with Management Science Associates. MSA is a leading-edge information management, statistical analysis, and business intelligence firm. Don has over 17 years of experience delivering business insights derived from a variety of data sources, including scanners, manufacturer and distributor shipments, and transactional market basket information. Don holds a BS degree in economics from Allegheny College and an MBA in marketing and finance from Katz School at the University of Pittsburgh. He's been a frequent speaker at NATO events and other retail conferences, and Don will be providing us with an update on market trends in the tobacco industry. I think you'll find it very informative. Please welcome Don.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, I hope you find this informative. We'll see, huh? Fun with data. Okay, so I have a lot to talk about this afternoon, and I'll take you through sort of the agenda. You know, I thought this past year was pretty crazy in this category. And I will tell you, this next year is probably going to be even crazier. So we'll take a look at what we saw. Before we get started, just from a legal perspective, when we look at the data that we present, we look at it from a retailer's perspective, from your perspective, if you're a retailer. So this does not reflect anything on a manufacturer's business. It is not meant to look ahead. In fact, in many cases, because many of the tobacco clients have not as yet done their fourth quarter call, I'm only showing you through third quarter of 2019. But I'll talk a little bit where I can about what we think is happening in fourth quarter, that type of thing. So let's get started. On the agenda itself, you can see that we'll talk about nicotine tobacco market trends. We'll look at age 21 restriction, menthol bans, where they've occurred. We'll look at vapor then. So we'll go nicotine tobacco, we'll move to vapor, we'll look at age 21 again. We'll do a vape shop survey. We actually look at what's happening in vape shops. And I think it may be interesting with the new vape rules that Tom just talked about to see what's happening in vape shops and what that may mean for your business. We'll then look at CBD, and we'll start with Google search trends. We'll look at consumer attitudes, usage trends. We'll look at market share data, C-store data, and we'll even look at what's happening in dispensaries to see how that may relate to what may be happening in the convenience stores today as well as in the tobacco outlets. I'll talk a little bit at the end about the role of CBD and the role it can play in severe pain and opioid use disorder and what the potential is for that, because that could impact the amount of business you're able to do with these products. And then finally, we'll do some key findings and see if we have some time for some questions. So let's get started. So we'll talk first about nicotine and tobacco. Here's the first slide that we typically always start with. Here's a way to read this. You see the blue pie slice right there. Those are convenience stores. The orange are tobacco outlets. The gray are drugstores. The yellow are dollar stores. And the green are all of the trade, which would be your mass merchandisers and that type of thing. If you look at the pie on the left, you see that convenience stores account for 57% of all the stores in the U.S. Tobacco outlets account for 3% of all stores in the U.S. But look on the right. This is the percentage of tobacco volume those outlets do. Convenience stores do 71% of all tobacco sales in the U.S. Interestingly, it used to be, a couple of years ago we were showing this, it was about 70%. So actually convenience has picked up 1% or 2% within this category. Outlets now account for tobacco outlets account for about 8% of all tobacco sales in the U.S., far less number of tobacco outlets in the U.S. as compared to convenience stores. But 8% is a very good figure, and you know they concentrate on the selling of tobacco. So that's rather strong. I will say tobacco outlets used to be about 9%. So I think convenience has picked up some of that. To a certain extent, based on some research we've done, it may be because the price advantage isn't quite as strong as it used to be in some tobacco outlets. That could be a possible reason, but we can talk about that later. Okay, let's look on to where we see the total industry going. And I have to tell you, when I first saw these figures, it surprised me. Overall, the market is down about 2.4% across all outlets. So 2.4% in volume. 3 or 4 years ago, I was doing these presentations. That was 0.3%, 0.5%. So it looks pretty bad, right? But something happened in 2019 that was different than many past years. And anybody have any idea what that was that influenced this? The major manufacturers took 3 price increases in 2019 versus typically 2 in past years. That does seem to have had an effect on the amount of volume that we were seeing going through outlets. I'm going to show you in a minute. Now I'm looking at consumer units. That means units through the cash register. In a moment, I will show you serving units, and those are equivalent units. We equivalize the units to show you what actually consumers are using. And actually the figures are not as bad. So I'll show you that in a minute. But just to call your attention here to, if I can use a laser pointer, to call your attention here to the, whoops, it wasn't that one, was it? Let me try this. There we go. Dollar stores over there. You can see those are the only numbers in green. So dollar stores tobacco business is up about 4.4%. Look at the number below that, 14% increase in distribution. That means store count. That means 14% more dollar stores added tobacco this past year. The reason that's important is that growth in dollar stores is really due to a distribution build. It's not to them doing their business better. We did a recent study, this was about 6 months ago, on convenience stores, and do you know that about 40% of convenience stores in this past year were able to grow their tobacco business? So even though we're seeing this kind of a decline, it certainly is possible for you to improve your tobacco business. Not impossible at all, but this decline was stronger than what we had seen in the past, so we need to keep an eye on this. Let me show you then, when we look at it in serving units, a couple of points. One, you can see that 2.4% drops to just 1.9%, so under a 2% decline in terms of consumers using nicotine. But let's look at convenience gas. Recall in this last slide, 2.2% decline. When I show you in serving units, it's only about a 1% decline. Good news for convenience, right? And this is the reason that many convenience stores are able to grow their business. That is not that great of a change. Look at for tobacco outlets, it's minus 2.4% when we talk serving units, as compared to, now I'm back on the other slide, only 2% when I look at consumer units. And here's the reason for that. Convenience is actually stronger in vapor than tobacco outlets. Vapor typically is undercounted when you look at consumer units. Cigarettes are counted pretty accurately. So with tobacco outlets being far more dependent on cigarettes as a percentage of their business than convenience, it doesn't look as good, right? So their decline is a little bit greater at 2.4%. Even in this regard, you can see here the dollar stores business is still up just about 2%. They're the green numbers, and obviously that 14% increase in distribution is driving that. Okay, that's a look at the entire category. Let's move on to see what's happening by product form. Number one thing to point out, we're comparing third quarter of 2018 to third quarter of 2019. And if you look at cigarettes, they dropped in share. Now this is share of total market. So when consumers choose to use nicotine, 79.8% of the time in third quarter 2019, that middle column, they choose a cigarette. That's down 3.1 points. So consumers are moving somewhere else in within these product forms to get their nicotine. Not quite as much in cigarettes, but still 80% of the market is cigarettes. Large cigars are another bright spot, up a little bit at 2.6%. The other bright spots, modern oral. So we're talking about this. These categories are growing. That's up 0.12. It is one of the stronger categories right now in terms of growth. But look at the size of that category as compared. It's only 0.16% in third quarter of 2019 versus the previous year. Its share in third quarter of 2019, still very, very, very small. Let's go to the bottom and look at vapor. Vapor went up in third quarter of 2019. Now, there's some issues with vapor, and we'll talk about them as we get to vapor, but up 5.6% of the category. Vapor has been coming on pretty strong. I actually think it may surprise you, but I think vapor will continue to do well this next year. We'll talk a little bit about that as we go through this, but vapor is one of the key points in this category as well. I'll point out one other thing just before we move on. If you look at pipe tobacco and roll your own, see the very small figures for pipe tobacco and roll your own. With the economy as strong as it has been these past couple of years, we've actually seen consumers moving from rolling your own cigarette to purchasing typically deep discount cigarettes. And one of the things that we've seen, it's one of the highest growth rates we've seen for any cigarette category. The deep discount category, in the most recent figure that I saw, it was up about 16% versus the prior year. So deep discount right now is growing actually quite considerably. And we think that's because of the improving economy. Consumers are not necessarily rolling your own, are going into the pre-made product and purchasing in the deep discount category. Okay, that gives you an idea then of the product forms. Let's move on to our cigarette projection. This typically gets a lot of attention. And over this past year, we know that the Nielsen data has come out at one point a minus 11% decline. Our data wasn't quite showing that. In fact, it was far more in the 5 to 6% range. Here's what we've seen. Now, this is updated through the end of 2019, because I wanted to give you a picture of this, because this is so important to each of your businesses. In 2019, we actually saw a 5.3% decline in business in cigarettes, not anywhere near as bad as some other sources have been predicting or thought would occur. Next year, in 2020, we're looking to a minus 4.5% to a 5.5% decline. Truthfully, we're a little optimistic it's going to be closer to that minus 4.5%. It will depend, again, on the major cigarette manufacturers and whether they take two price increases as they have in the past, or 3 price increases as they did last year. So that will influence what happens with 2020. But we're fairly optimistic as to where the cigarette market will be going in 2020. One of the things that we've seen, and this is just based on historical patterns, we've been tracking cigarettes for many, many years, we have seen that after several years of major declines, the cigarette market tends to moderate. We think this might be that moderating year, and we're sort of expecting that that decline will be less than it has been in the past. So we'll keep our eyes open. We'll see if I'm back here next year. I'll show you what did happen, and we'll see if I was right. But right now, we're looking at a 4.5 to 5.5% decline. Not quite as bad as we've been seeing the past couple of years. Okay, let's look at the change, overall total U.S. cigarette trends, and let's look at the top line with cigarettes at minus 5.5%. Now, this is the past 52 weeks. That was 2019. This is just the past 52 weeks. So we're seeing about a 5.5% decline the past 52 weeks. Convenience gas at 5.1. Tobacco outlets, not so bad at minus 3.6. The reason for that being, just as I told you that deep discount category is growing, tobacco outlets are very strong in the deep discount category. That category growing at the 15, 16%. Their business has not declined quite as strongly as the convenience industry this past year. The only other thing I'll point out on this slide, you can see menthol across all outlets down minus 4.4%. Non-menthol down minus 6.1%. Menthol has always been consistently, in every study we've done, menthol consumers are typically far more loyal than the tobacco-flavored consumers, and we never see as big a decline in menthol as we do in the tobacco-flavored products. Okay. I'm gonna skip the other numbers here. We're gonna have a lot to go through, and let's look at large cigars and little filtered cigars. So the cigar industry, very different types of products. Large cigars defined as cigarillos, typically come in multi-packs, right? 2, 3, 4. Little filtered cigars come in packs of 20, smoked like a cigarette, typically have the filter, that type of thing. We see that large cigars, this has been a bright spot in the nicotine category for the past many years. Large cigars are up about 3.99% across all outlets. 3.6 in convenience, and again, tobacco outlets very strong at plus 5.1% with large cigars. Pre-pricing and promotion has had a lot to do with the growth in this category. Convenience typically embraced this quite quickly. Tobacco outlets, it took a little bit longer for that promotion, for them to begin to embrace these promotions. That's the reason their base is not as strong as in convenience. Convenience was pretty strong in it a year ago. So anyway, but a very bright spot across large cigars. Little filtered cigars, in a lot of cases, that's taxation levels. In many instances, because they're smoked like a cigarette, municipalities, local areas are starting to catch on that they should be taxed like a cigarette. That's hurt that business a little bit over this past year or two. So little filtered cigars, not as declining as quickly as cigarettes, but are also in a declining mode. Okay, what about moist? Moist has been a very bright spot in the industry for the past many years. Typically flat. I think we're projecting a minus 1.3% decline this year and pretty much flat next year. Moist is pretty steady. We see this as being pretty steady next year as well, and not much change within this industry. Okay, let's look at the age 21 plus impact on tobacco, and I'll try to give you an idea as to what's occurring here. I'm going to show you one slide. Now, this was done in third quarter, but Tom mentioned the states where the age 21 restriction is occurring, and he showed a similar map to what I am showing you here. In third quarter, the total industry, about 38% of all products sold across tobacco was limited by an age 21 restriction. In cigarettes, it was 38% as well. Vapor was 43%. Moist was 33%. So we did an analysis. I think this is something that will get a lot of attention. Analysis across these states except Texas. So all the other states except Texas. And we looked at what was the decline that we believed was due. It's difficult to isolate factors, and that's the reason it's very tough to come up with a figure here. But we tried to isolate what was the impact of an age 21 restriction. If you're aware, most major manufacturers are saying that they would expect about a 1.5% decline. I have to tell you, in the analysis that we did, we found it was about 0.5%. So a much smaller decline than what most of the majors were seeing. This was actually very good news. We thought that was a rather positive result. We think that will impact next year's sales. As Tom mentioned, it is now required, a federal law, that tobacco can only be sold to those consumers 21 years and older. But we don't think the decline will be quite as great as consumers may be, as many in the industry may be expecting. We're seeing about a 0.5%, and we're attributing that, and we're including that in that 4.5 to 5% decline that we're projecting for next year as well. A little more positive than what you may think. Keep in mind, as Tom said, that it is not illegal for an adult consumer at the age of 18, 19, or 20 to consume tobacco. That's not illegal. They just can't purchase it. And I think consumers will figure out ways, if that's a product they want, to figure out how to get it. So we're not seeing this as being significant to the industry. 0.5, of course, is not great, but it's certainly not as bad as some of the sources have been predicting. Okay. Let's move on to the impact of cigarette, sort of the menthol bans in certain areas of the country. I'll show you two areas, San Francisco, and then we'll look at a place in Massachusetts. San Francisco ban, all I'm going to show you here, the light blue line represents San Francisco. And in January 1 of 2019, San Francisco banned all flavored tobacco, including menthol and mint. Surrounding areas, Alameda and Daly City, are in the dark blue line. After the ban, very simply, you can see the very big difference. San Francisco declined by 24.2%. But when it is in a limited area and the geography is not that great, you can see the consumers simply travel. So they went to Daly City, Alameda, wherever, and you can see their business was up almost 20%. This is very typical, and we've seen this before. Similar results that you're going to see on this next slide as well. What that means for retailers is if you're impacted by a ban on certain products, you have to adjust your product mix. But also, those retailers outside of that area, your business may be impacted as well, and you need to adjust your product mix as well, because you may be seeing an increase in certain products that were banned in a neighboring area. We actually did a study recently, this is about a year ago, and found that retailers were impacted up to 50 miles away from a banned area, up to 50 miles. So you really can have an impact. Just keep that in mind. Let's look quickly at Massachusetts. Here, starting April 1 of 2019, Somerville, Massachusetts restricted the sale of both menthol cigarettes and all e-cigarette products to adult-only tobacco retail stores. Somerville being in the blue line, the surrounding areas, Medford and Cambridge, in the darker green line. You can see here those lines, they were meeting right there before the ban. Pretty similar results. After the ban, of course, only minus 6.3% in the surrounding areas and minus 25% in Somerville. Similar type results. You can see here that consumers traveled again to the outside area to get it. This is cigarette volume. I want to show you this as well. This is non-menthol cigarette volume. Now, this was not banned, but look what happened in Somerville, and look at the slope of those lines. In both cases, in Somerville, consumers who maybe were in Somerville purchasing the menthol cigarettes, they moved to tobacco. And sometimes a lot of people may not believe this happens, but this is confirming some of the studies that we've done, where consumers do tend, if they can't get their menthol, they will go back to tobacco. And in fact, tobacco went up. Just look at those two lines that curve up after the ban. It went up in both Somerville and surrounding areas. So consumers, and this is another point we'll make when we talk about vapor, consumers are somewhat flexible. And they will be willing to change or adjust their product set depending on the products that are available to them within their marketplace. We'll talk about that again in a minute, but this was some interesting results. Okay, so let's get into vapor and see what is happening there. Again, this slide here. So cartridges across all outlets are the shining star. This has been true for the past 3 or 4 years. They're up about 125% third quarter versus 52 weeks a year ago. Convenience gas, that's a little bit higher, at 130% increase. Tobacco outlets, not quite as strong, but at 62%. Disposables up 6% this past year versus the past 52 weeks. Now, as Tom mentioned, disposables are able to stay on the market now until May. I would think this is going to be an interesting category this year because they are still able to sell flavors. We'll have to see what happens here. Disposables several years ago were written off. Could bring a new life back to the disposable category here. We'll see. Kits are up 8.9%. But I'm telling you, I'm going to say this, I'm showing you the wrong number, and here's why. The way that we track kits are devices that are items that have the device plus a cartridge. Many manufacturers right now, and in fact over 2/3 of the market in kits, manufacturers have removed that cartridge so that their product is not taxed as a tobacco product. So I'm only showing that up at 8.9%. That number is actually far higher. We'll be getting that number in the future after we recode the data. But right now, most kits do not contain a cartridge, and therefore those have been very strong third quarter versus year ago. E-liquids are down. E-liquids, funny thing, because now you can still sell flavors in e-liquids, right? But e-liquids are almost gone from the traditional classes of trade. So those are down, as you can see here, 19.3% across all outlets, about 35% in convenience, and about 7%, 7 or 8% in tobacco outlets. I will call out here, notice how much stronger, I showed you the dollar stores and how they were strong in the cigarette category. It was up, those are the green numbers. Look here how it really is very different for vapor. One thing that dollar stores have not quite gotten yet, are particularly in cartridges, which you can see they're way down in cartridges. That's a bright spot of this category in the past. They never caught on to that. We'll have to see what happens with everything that'll be going on in vapor this year, what will happen with dollar stores. We'll just keep watching and see what occurs, but some interesting results there. Okay, age 21 impact on vapor. Let me just show you this. This is Illinois. Illinois had an age 21 purchase restriction. It went into effect on July 1st of 19. And you can see here Illinois is in the blue line, the surrounding states, the average of the surrounding states in the red line. Illinois had a spike at one point. If you averaged it out, the lines would be somewhat similar. You can see here in Illinois, then, their vapor business was only up, still up, but not up as much, by 12.9%. Surrounding areas up about 35%. You can see consumers, again, just moving or shifting since they couldn't get it within that state. If we look at a vape, now, I want to look at this as well. Let's look at some vape shop data, and let's see how that might relate to what will be happening in your retail locations this next year. The reason I'm showing this is that vape shops are still able to sell the open systems. They are able to sell flavors. Their business may be changing, maybe getting more attention. We'll have to see how it develops this year. But what can it mean for the retail locations? So the survey was done. This was actually done in January of 2019. We received responses about 171 different vape shops all across the United States. They were validated for their response, that type of thing. Let's see what we learned. The first thing that I just wanted to mention to you, most vape shop managers and owners say, the number one thing, vape has helped their customers to completely quit smoking cigarettes. You can see very similar results across both 2018, we're calling it 2018 since it was done in January of 19, 2018 and 17. So very similar results in terms of what the reason that they think their shoppers are using vape. Second point they gave is helping reduce the amount of cigarettes, right? Thirdly, they said, despite steady vaping, they haven't, consumers have still continued to smoke cigarettes, a very small percentage there. What these vape shop owners are saying is that they really believe that vape has contributed to their clients not using as much, either eliminating or not using as many combustible cigarettes. Just an interesting approach to the way that the vape shop has seen their business. So let's look a little bit further at what really is happening there. If we look at the customer base, we asked them what percentage were new vapors each year. And this was somewhat interesting. Similar results in the years. Typically, it falls in the 10 to 30%. 10 to 30% of consumers in a vape shop each year tend to be new customers. And the vape shop owners are able to tell that because they get questions such as, what devices should I be using? What is it? How do I use a liquid? How do I fill this? When do I buy replacement coils? Those types of questions. So 10 to 30% of consumers tend to be new each year in the vape shop. And that's a considerable amount. I actually don't think that that will decrease. Do you know that most consumers, when they go to a vape shop, they typically start with a tobacco flavor? So most consumers that are interested in either dual usage, using both vape and combustibles, or just going to vape, typically start with a tobacco flavor, which will be available now everywhere. So I don't see that switching, impacting the switching to vape this next year. All these new restrictions on the flavors of the vape, I don't think that'll have much of an effect. So anyway, let's look at a few other things about a vape shop. So we asked them, what topics do new customers typically ask about? Number one was flavors. Number two was device. Three was equipment operation, nicotine strength, product pricing, all the things that you would imagine they're going to be asking about. But they typically, even though they ask about flavors, they start typically in either tobacco or menthol, just the flavors they're used to within their combustible products. If we look at what sells in a vape shop, number one is premium liquids. Number two is replacement coils. Number three is standard liquids. This has been true for the past 2 years. Even beyond that, it has been true. Not quite as much. Vape shops have actually cut down a little bit on the number of liquids they carry. But if you look at there, you can see the number of SKUs they carry in the liquids. It's typically, it's close to 120 for the premium and 80 or so for the standard. They carry a lot of liquids. It does mean, and this is the reason that liquids just haven't been typically carried or very strong in the conventional classes of trade. It's typically because you have to carry an awful lot of them to please a vapor. And it's just very difficult to do that. While this will still be available, flavors will still be available in the vape shops, it's most likely they will be owning this product category for a while. So we'll have to see what happens here. We're going to be watching this over this next year as well. Just some ideas to keep in mind as you manage your own vape business over this next year. Okay. Here's why vape shops may continue to do very well, and I'll just point out here. We asked them about their closed system, and as we know, based on what Tom said, as of February 6th, closed systems will be going off the market. So only about 15% of their business do they see today in the closed system. The percentage of business associated with the pod-based system, only about 24%. But the percentage of business associated with an open pod system, which they will be allowed to be sold, these are things that can be refilled, about 43%. And if they look at the total open system devices plus liquids, it's 71% of their business. So at least up until May, and beyond May, if they've filed their PMTAs, as long as they're carrying open type systems and liquids from manufacturers that have filed that, they'll be able to continue this business. We don't see this impacting them. But keep in mind, depending on retailers, if you're thinking of possibly expanding to open systems, it really is very strong in the vape shops and probably will continue to be for quite a while. There's going to be a lot of considerations. We hope to give more perspective of this as this year develops, but a lot of considerations that you're going to have to consider over this next year. Okay. Here's one final point. We asked them if they carried any of the major brands. Now, this is back from January of 19, right? But you can see 36-37% of vape shops did carry the Juul product. Blue was about 6%, and Logic and Enjoy in the 1% to 2% range. We would expect, after the May date that Tom mentioned of when the manufacturers must have filed a PMTA, more and more vape shops will be carrying major brands. We think actually this was an encouraging slide. It showed their availability to do that. When vape shops first came on the marketplace, they were very disinclined to carry any kind of product from a major manufacturer. It just wasn't something they were going to do. We're seeing in this survey, we're actually in the process of doing another survey now, we're actually seeing they are beginning to carry more and more of the branded products. It's potential, if you're a manufacturer in the audience, to consider that class of trade and that outlet, because it may be an opportunity for you. Okay, let's go on here to the CBD market. So we've looked at tobacco, we've looked at vapor. What could be happening in CBD? Just so you know, management science has been strong in tobacco over the past many, many years, in fact, 40, 50 years. We plan on taking the same level of expertise and applying it to the tobacco marketplace, to the CBD marketplace. So becoming just as strong in CBD and cannabis as we have been in tracking the tobacco business across the US. So I'm going to be showing you today many different data sources that we use to see what is really happening within the CBD marketplace, and then what can that mean for your business. Okay, first thing, cannabis is a 4,000-year-old product. It has actually had a lot of consumer interest for those 4,000 years, up until about 1970, when, unfortunately, in the US, it was considered a Schedule I drug. We can talk everything that happened since there. But really today, CBD is seen as a prime healthcare and wellness. It really is seen as one of the major cannabinoids available in the cannabis plant. December 20th, 2018, the U.S. Farm Bill, as everybody knows, legalized hemp CBD for OTC use. So we're going to look at what has happened since that time. And the FDA is going to be guiding this product, and we'll see what that might mean as well. First thing I'll start with is Google search trends. The reason we start with this when we look at a new category is because they tend to give us an indication as to what may be happening with that category. What's the level of consumer interest, and what will that then mean for purchase intent? So if we start with Google search trends, I'll show you 4 different lines. The green line represents vape, vapor, e-cig, and Juul. The purple bluish line is CBD. The gold line is hemp, and the orange-colored, red-colored line is THC. The first thing you notice is that CBD is far greater in terms of search than either THC or hemp over this past year. In fact, we've been tracking this, since what? 2015. And it's only recently come on strong in terms of hemp and THC. Look at CBD and look at vape. And look at what's most interesting is the way later in 2019, from about October 2019, the drop in search for both CBD and vapor. And here's what happened during that time period. I think everybody's aware now of the THC vaping crisis. There were consumers who were vaping typically illicit type pods containing THC. They actually also contain vitamin E acetate, bad to get that in your lungs, causing a lot of problems for many consumers. That crisis and the perceptions of that crisis actually influenced the CBD marketplace over this past year. And in fact, to the point where consumers even stopped searching on them. But I want you to see the very most recent lines, both for CBD as well as vapor. See how they start to pick back up? We're starting to see this today. And this data I'm going to be showing you on CBD, we'll see that over this third quarter, CBD sales declined. And it declined because of the consumer perceptions on the vape crisis and their perception that they are now not as likely. They just have become far more cautious in terms of trying something new. It particularly hurt CBD vape products, and I'll show you that in a few minutes. But they really became quite cautious, and that hurt this industry. Maybe you remember a couple of years ago in terms of energy drinks, and there was a caffeine scare. Maybe you're getting too much caffeine from energy drinks, and there were a few consumers that overdid it, and there were some issues. And for a while there, energy drinks, which were growing, really started to decline. But very quickly after that, they really regained that potential. We're seeing that for the CBD marketplace as well. And we believe over this next year that we'll actually see CBD return to quite a bit of growth. The other thing I'll say here, remember how Juul took off in the 18, 19? And you can see how far the Google search line went up at that point. We're starting to see that for CBD. And this is showing us that there is a lot of consumer interest in CBD. It should, and it has, developed into purchase intent, consumers purchasing it. We continue to see very strong results for that. We think this uptick is now the start again as consumer awareness of what happened within that THC vaping crisis becomes better, and as time passes, we really see that things will improve. And this is that last little uptick there in the line is a sign that we believe things will be improving. Okay, let's get on to consumer usage and attitude. I mentioned how MSA is really committing themselves to tracking the cannabis and CBD marketplaces just as we have with tobacco, using that expertise and that knowledge to apply it to this marketplace. The first thing we started was with survey data. And a partner of ours, Consumer Research Around Cannabis, surveyed 87,000 legal adults for their usage and attitudes towards CBD. This was in 53 markets, and it spanned fully legal markets, medically legal markets, where it's only medically legal, and then where it is totally illegal markets. And you can see the different markets that we spoke to. So what are consumers thinking right now about CBD? First of all, and I'll call out the points on the right. Most adults, 69%, approve of either or both uses of cannabis. That's either they approve of medical or legal or both. It's almost 3/4 of adults. 16% still have no opinion. That's good because those are people that we could influence and get them interested in CBD. And 15% disapprove of legalization. Now, we've been doing this survey a couple of years. That 15% has stayed pretty steady. My bet is it will continue to stay steady, but that is a very small percent of the total audience for CBD. 37% of respondents have tried cannabis, so 37% tried it. Out of that, 15% are currently using it. You can see in here, and I'll just call out the pie chart a little bit. The dark red, 48%, those are people who approve of both medical and recreational use. So at least half of consumers in the US approve of medical and recreational use of cannabis. Okay, why do consumers use CBD cannabis? The top 5 reasons. In any studies you have seen on this, I have always seen this been very consistent. Number 1 is pain, whether it happens to be, in this case, temporary minor pain, or the third reason there, treating chronic or recurring pain. Number 2, anxiety, stress, depression. That always comes up, and you can see how similar all these are. So it's called them 1, 2, 3, but they're really equal in importance to why consumers use it. And even fourth, helping me to sleep. That typically comes out sometimes at number 1, but these are all very standard for the reasons consumers have purchased it. And finally, form of relaxation, that type of thing. These are great reasons, right? It's the reason that we speak very strongly about the potential for this marketplace, because the reasons that consumers are using it's something that everybody experiences. Okay, so why would consumers not use it? And it's typically for moral, religious, just their sort of background and their belief reasons. So one is they oppose it on a moral, spiritual, or social background. They don't consider it to be legal in their state, so they're not going to try anything that isn't legal in their state. They would not like the effects, fear of mental or physical harm are the final reasons, just those concerns. Now that's at 15% of consumers that I mentioned to you. So this is a minority of consumers that feel this way. If we look at the usage forms, now this is cannabis, and the reason I'm showing you this is because I'll be comparing it to CBD in just a little bit, but there's an important point on here. and you guys, everybody can remember this who has ever tried cannabis. Number one way to really get to use cannabis is really smoking it, right? It's the fastest way that it gets into your system. So number one is smoking it. But number two, and this is just recent, came out as number two, is CBD. So even those consumers that are typically have been using cannabis, they still are very interested in CBD. In fact, now it's number two in terms of the usage for cannabis. So those consumers that have dispensaries near them or it's legal in their state, still number two is to get CBD. And we'll talk more about that as we go on. Edibles are number three, pre-rolls number four, and concentrate extracts, and you can see how it goes on. Okay, what about the demographic profile? Here's something that we think is very strong for the retailers in the audience. Demographic profile, the people that are likely to approve of both CBD and cannabis, they typically are younger, males 18 to 49, females 18 to 34. They typically are blue collar, some are unemployed, and some are students. So unemployed and students sort of go together, but their income is typically high. So if those people are employed, it's typically construction workers, tradesmen, plumbers, landscapers, people who earn a fairly steady and strong income are the consumers that typically will approve of this. Typically younger is the area to keep in mind. Those that don't approve, that 15%, are typically older, as you would imagine. They typically are retired. They still have that fairly high income level of 50,000 plus, but these are the people that are unlikely to approve. What's nice about this is for both tobacco outlet retailers in the audience and convenience retailers in the audience, these are typically the people that go through your store. And if you look at the average, the most likely shopper in a convenience store, it's a male 18 to 49. I mean, this is your audience. I'm going to show you another reason that's very strong in just a minute. But this is good news for the convenience and tobacco outlet retailers in the audience. Now, in this case here, we looked across the three different types of markets that we analyzed. Those where it's medically legal, those where it's both medically and recreationally legal, and those where it's totally illegal. So the red line represents where it's fully legal for both medical and recreational usages. Medical legal is the gray line, and then the black line is where it's illegal. And what you see is here very similar usage. Two things I'll point out. One, it really takes a state to approve cannabis for recreational use before consumers really start to embrace both CBD and cannabis, before they really start to embrace the product. You can see the gray bar and the black bar for each of the product forms, they're fairly similar across this. That means where it's medically legal, there's very little impetus or very little encouragement for consumers to get involved in it. When it's only medically legal, they don't really start to embrace it until it is fully recreationally and medically legal within their state. The thing to point out here is typically what happens in those states where it is only medically legal or illegal, consumers use a rather more discreet form of using the product just because it really isn't accepted within their state. So that it's not as much smoking, but you can see go on down the line and you can see how consumers use it there. All right, let's go on to see what else is going on here. Here's the other slide that I think is most encouraging for the retailers in the audience. And here's the way to read this. The blue bar represents a percentage of total people. The green bar represents those consumers that use CBD. If we look at using cigarettes, 22% of the people, of those 87,000 people, are smoking cigarettes in the survey, use cigarettes at some point. But of those people that use cigarettes, 37% of them consume CBD. You would expect it, if it was equal, to be at 22% of cigarette users as well, but it isn't. It's up to 37%. And in fact, across every tobacco category, e-cigarettes, cigars, chewing tobacco, pipe tobacco, the tobacco consumer is far more likely to have a favorable disposition toward and to be using CBD as compared to the typical consumer. Why is that good news? For the tobacco outlet retailers, for the convenience retailers, you've got these people walking through your door on a daily basis, right? There should be a lot of interest on the part of those consumers in CBD. It's rather encouraging results for the retailers in the audience. Okay, what about some usage trends themselves? Across all those 87,000 people, 19% said they've tried the product. And this is CBD. 19% have tried CBD. 9% currently use, and 7% purchase it for a pet. So this is something we also tell the retailers in the audience, don't forget that pet usage can actually be pretty important for CBD and can be an important element. So when you're considering putting CBD into your store, make sure you have a few products that might appeal to a pet because consumers do look at it for that. We'll tell you we've used it on our dog and it does seem to help. I don't know. But anyway, so keep that in mind just as you go through this. All right. What about purchase likelihood? 7% of people who 7% of total audience are likely to purchase CBD in the next 7 days. In the next 30 days, it's actually at 8%, and over 6 months, it's actually up to about 11%. This is the CBD hemp. So these are products that you are able to sell. We specifically asked CBD from hemp. So these are the products that you're able to carry. So you can see that's not bad. So if you look over the next 30 days, 8% of people, we just saw 22% smoke. Not a bad, I mean, you know how much tobacco business you do. While this is smaller, it's still not a bad percentage of the total population that has an interest in CBD, and will be purchasing it over the next 30 days. Okay, let's look at purchase frequency. 17% of those people who use CBD, 17% said they purchase it once a week, 14% every 2 weeks, 28% once a month, and at every 6 months it was 32%. Part of the reason for it going out there quite a bit is that in a lot of cases consumers are using topicals, creams, and lotions on their skin. They typically last quite a period of time. Those things they typically ingest or consume immediately. It's the lower percentages. But what's driving that up are the lotions and the creams that can drive up that purchase frequency. Okay. What about purchase amount? This is absolutely brand new data. We just got this in. This was based on a survey. We're starting to ask this. And we thought this was pretty interesting. We asked consumers, of those consumers that purchase CBD, how much do you spend on a monthly basis? And here was the results. From $1 to $29 to $30, about 29% of people spend in that range. Look at this next one. Between $30 and $100, 53% of CBD consumers spend between $30 and almost $100 per month. In the $100 to $300 range, 15% of the consumers who use CBD said they spend that much per month. 3% are spending $300 or more. Really encouraging results, I think, and it really suggests the strength of the category. It also suggests that it'll be a nice ring when you're selling a CBD item, because typically they're going to be spending money on these products. So this was the first time that we'd gotten this information, but it certainly was encouraging in terms of the amount that people are willing to spend. Clearly it shows the CBD consumer believes in the products and is willing to spend money on them. Okay. Let's look at purchase form. And I'll show you a little bit more about this in a minute, but what is typically purchased? Now, this is, again, across all CBD, across all those 87,000 people. Edibles are number one at 37%. Topicals at 30%. Topicals are the creams and lotions. Tinctures, these are typically oils that you would put under your tongue. They're typically taken sublingually. Vaporizers, vape pens at 26%. That's something that you would vape. And then drinks at 21%. I'm going to show you a little specifically what happens in a minute in convenience stores today, but this is what most consumers are talking about here. Okay, where do they buy it? Across those 87,000 consumers, number one source was the internet. That's been since we've been doing this survey, that has been the most significant result. That's also the way that the vape category started. So internet sales was number one with vape for quite a few years as the category developed. Number two here, and I think this is also good news, smoke or vape shop. So the tobacco outlets, the vape shops, you're number two in terms of where they purchase their CBD. Number three was natural specialty retailers such as your health food store, a GNC, that type of store. Number four is convenience stores. So I have to tell you, I think that's actually encouraging news for both the tobacco outlet retailers and the convenience retailers in the audience. That smoke and vape shops are number two, where you do typically get more involvement with the person selling the products. There's more time spent with you within those types of outlets as compared to convenience that just doesn't have quite the time. That's actually very encouraging results. Convenience being number four, not bad. And as the internet and as this product and CBD knowledge improves among the general audience, it's good today. It has certainly a great potential to get better. You will find that the internet will drop off. Consumers will be purchasing more in their stores, just as they did with vape. And you will begin to see that your sales improving even more. Great potential here, but not a bad start. Okay, let's look at the purchase reasons. Now, this is just CBD. Remember when we talked cannabis, the reason that consumers purchase cannabis? Now, this is just on CBD, and you can see how very similar the reasons to purchase CBD are. It relieves temporary or minor pain, relieves chronic pain. Both temporary pain and chronic pain, 1 and 2. Helps anxiety, stress, that was number 2 on cannabis. Helps me sleep, that again was number 4 with cannabis, and you can go on down the line. I'll point something out here that they even think one was prevent future ailments. I'm not sure it can do that, but consumers even feel that way. The point on CBD, it's really seen as a very strong health, wellness type item. So if you're marketing that product, make sure that you market in that way, because that's how consumers perceive it. Okay. Let's look at some market share data. MSA has agreed with a firm called Headset. Headset looks at dispensary data. Really interesting stuff here. Now, the first thing we're starting to track is just the percentage of CBD versus THC in some of the more popular items, such as gummies, mints, chocolate, candy, lozenge, and gum. The bright blue here on the left really shows the percentage of each of those products available in just CBD. The dark blue, and I'll call this out, really shows where CBD and THC are equal in the products. And this is, you can see, the largest section for dispensaries. And the reason for that is that many consumers believe that for CBD to be most effective, you also need other cannabinoids with it. And THC being one of the major other cannabinoids. It's really seen that way, so that 1-to-1 ratio. It's just something to consider as to the types of products consumers are purchasing in, you can't sell this today, but in the dispensary type locations. We're going to be tracking this because laws change, things change. As consumers change preferences, we'll be watching this and letting you know what happens here. But to show you, we have the capabilities of going into that kind of detail in the CBD and cannabis marketplace. Okay. Another thing that Headset has shared with us is this type of information on market share, and this is CBD at dispensaries. This is also encouraging and should say a lot for your business as well. The gray line represents market share of CBD within dispensaries. The red bars represent total sales of CBD. CBD has grown to the point, now I showed you it was number 2 for people who purchase cannabis. It's grown to 35% of all the products that are sold that are not inhaled in dispensaries. So CBD is growing quite considerably. Now, one point in this, because dispensaries are able to spend more time with people, we don't think that THC vaping crisis that I mentioned had quite the impact on dispensary sales as it has the conventional classes of trade. And because those types of stores are able to spend more time with their consumers, they're more involved, they've recovered far more quickly from the CBD impact of the THC vaping crisis than has the conventional classes of trade. We'll talk about that a little more in a minute, but that's one of the things that you'll see on these slides. This is sort of interesting as well. Now, within dispensaries, edibles have the greatest market share, and that's the reason for the red line. So total category sales of edibles are very strong in dispensaries. Less strongs are tincture and sublingual type products, topical products, beverages, and then capsules. But CBD product sales, the gray bars, show what percentage of those sales are in CBD. So edibles are very small. About 18% of all edibles sold in dispensary are CBD. But almost 80% of your tinctures and sublinguals in a dispensary are CBD. 85% of your topicals are CBD in a dispensary. 21% of your beverages, and you can see over 40% of your capsules. CBD has a lot of consumer interest across all the different product forms, and that's what we're seeing from this dispensary data. All right, that was dispensary. Now let's compare that to what's happening today in C-stores. This is our Infometrics program, 50-plus distributor partners. 15 of the top 21 U.S. wholesalers provide us data for this type of service. We cover 30-plus NACS categories. Rather comprehensive data set. First thing I want to tell you is the percentage of distributors that are reporting that they're carrying CBD. It started out in January of 2019, only 40% of distributors were carrying CBD items. That's really due to the legal uncertainty in the marketplace that existed throughout 2019. I can't tell you it's much better today, but what I can tell you is because it has taken so long and there hasn't been a whole lot on CBD that has been a guidance provided by the government, distributors said, this is too big of a market, I'm getting into it. And right now we're seeing about 85% of distributors, November to 7 of 2019, are carrying some type of CBD item. So your local distributor, the distributor you currently rely on, is likely carrying a line of CBD products. This is the manufacturer growth that we've seen. So in starting, this is just over the course of a year, 37 manufacturers were being carried by distributors in January. We're now up to, almost 90 different manufacturers. Typically, because of the legal uncertainty, the manufacturers right now in the CBD area tend to be small. They tend to be more risk-taker, entrepreneurial type endeavors. Once the legal uncertainty clears, we are expecting, and this is being said by many people, we are expecting that the major manufacturers will be getting into this marketplace once that legal uncertainty does clear. But right now, there's about 90 smaller entrepreneurial type manufacturers that are providing products to the C-store and tobacco outlet channels through the typical distributors. Okay. This is just an indication of market share by the different manufacturers. I haven't identified them because just since January, look how it's changed. Look at the difference. At any one point, there would be a different market share for all of the major manufacturers. You can see here 7, 8, 9, 10. The green at the top represents all of the manufacturers. The colors below that all represent specific manufacturers, the top 7 or 8. And you can see in here how some started very strong. This dark brown sort of color, you can see where it started in the beginning of the year. Look where it is at the end of the year, far smaller market share than what they had. The gray that started at almost nothing, they really peaked. And in fact, if you look at where that's peaking, that's right in the middle of the THC vaping crisis, right when it's starting. Look at the end of the year, how all of the manufacturers have come on fairly strong. The blue color manufacturer has come on very strong. You know who declined the most? And I'll show you this in just a minute. Those CBD manufacturers that were big into vape, because vape was really hurt by this THC vaping crisis. I'll show you that in a minute. So you can see how it has changed quite considerably. We're calling, it's the wild, wild west right now. Without this government without direct guidance from the government, without FDA, without any, it's the smaller manufacturers. Good luck figuring out who to buy from, because it's very difficult. There's ways to figure it out, but it is a difficult job, and really the market shares have been changing quite considerably. Okay, this is the number of SKUs for the top CBD manufacturers. The point here is that it was fairly consistent over this past year. So most manufacturers came out with typically a rather broad product line across gummies, tinctures, pills, and lotions and creams, and really have stayed with it. There has not been a lot of development in terms of new manufacturers adding new items this past year. Here's the number of unique items. You can see it somewhat peaked as the number of manufacturers grew and then somewhat trailed off. That's sort of typical to what I'll be showing you in terms of sales over this past year, but that's the way that went. We're expecting that to start to pick back up. Here is unit sales. Now, keep in mind that in October, November of that year, the THC vaping crisis was sort of at its peak. Consumers had a lot of intrepidation because of this vaping crisis, and you can see where CBD sales started to decline. So I talked about how through third quarter it was declining, and you can see the line that went down really peaked in about July of this year. But look at the end. Look how it has started to pick back up. And you can see here it's beginning to look encouraging. We talked about what happened with caffeine and in the energy drink category. We're starting to see a similar type rebound here within CBD and starting to pick up here now at the end of the year. Dollars, very similar. That slide was units. This is dollar sales, and you can see here starting to improve considerably at the very end of the year as well. We've got to keep tracking this and see what develops here, but we're fairly encouraged by what we're seeing most recently. This is dollars per store, the amount of sales, and you can see in the later part of 19, when at the height of the vaping crisis, how consumer spending slowed down based on the stores that we were tracking here, but started to pick back up again on dollars per store basis at the end of the year, seeing similar results in that as well. In terms of dollar share, this is very interesting, and it points out the vape issue. We looked at first half of 2019. Those are the dark blue bars, versus the second half of 2019, the light blue bars. Gummies, you can see here pretty similar results in terms of sales, and in fact, excuse me, throughout 2019, gummies were the #1 item in convenience sales. Tinctures were #2, and pretty similar results for first half and second half of the year. Not a huge amount of impact there. Look at topicals. First half of the year at 9% market share, dollar share of convenience sales. Second half of the year, 16%. So at the time that vaping crisis hit, consumers became more concerned about ingesting something, taking something into their bodies, something new into their bodies, but they were okay with putting it on their body, right, using it externally. So topicals actually benefited from that vaping crisis this past year, growing from a 9% share to a 16% share. Vape itself, from a 21% share the first half of the year of your CBD category, down to 11%, almost half the share level that they had previously. So quite a hit on vape. This is exactly what we're talking about in terms of consumers seeing it very directly in vape, although all the categories experienced something. Pills actually up a little bit, beverage up a little bit. That 1% difference really is meaningless, stayed pretty consistent. Those are very small areas within the convenience channel. Here's the number of SKUs that's offered. The orange line represents vape, the dark orange line. Gummies are the dark blue line. Tinctures are the gray line. Topicals is sort of the gold-colored line. Pills, a darker blue line. And beverages, as you can see there on the very bottom, the very darkest blue line. I'm sorry, the beverages, the green line. You can see beverages, pills, and topicals are all sort of at the bottom. You can see where vape went up, and it was actually the #1 number of SKUs offered in convenience at some time just before the vaping crisis. You can see after that vaping crisis, it fell to #3, and really what's #1 right now are tinctures in terms of the number of SKUs that are offered. In terms of dollar sales, this is sort of interesting. The dotted line represents total CBD sales throughout 2019. And what this is showing is the impact that the vape category had on it, because vape is the orange line, and you can see it go from peaking again in July all the way down to the very bottom here at the end of the year. You can see how some items have started to rebound as well. Topicals, look how they've gone up. Those are the creams and lotions. Look how they have started to increase. You also see a bump in the gummies as well, picking back up. So we're starting to see here at the end of the year those product forms really taking off, as I've been mentioning to you, the improvement in the business over this next year. Okay, this sort of says it all. 3 columns here. The first column compares 2019 second quarter to first quarter. The second column compares third quarter then to second quarter, and the fourth quarter compares, third column compares fourth quarter to third quarter. In the second quarter this year compared to the first quarter, look at the green numbers. Everything's up. Gummies up 66%, vape up 79%, tinctures 143%, topicals 185%, pills 50%, beverage 90%. Total category up 93%, almost doubling your business from first quarter to second quarter. When I then compare it to third quarter to second quarter, it's the beginning of that vape crisis issue. Gummies down by 7%, vape down by 5%, tinctures down by 17%, topicals, the lotions and creams, up by 16%, pills at 6% up, beverage at 12% up. The market was pretty much flat, third quarter versus second quarter. When we start to look at fourth quarter, we really have the impact of this THC vaping crisis and what it meant to consumers. And here's how they reacted. Gummies down 21%, vape itself down 67%, tinctures down 18%, topicals pretty much flat. So they stayed flat, at least it was a little more positive for them. Pills minus 29%, beverage at minus 13%, a 24% decline across the category. Without vape, it would have been minus 14%. Really, the vape crisis impacted all the areas, and you need to keep that in mind as you're managing your CBD category. Impacted them all, although we're starting to see an uptick. Okay, what about dispensary CBD sales? I'll go through these quickly because I think we're getting really close on time. So dispensary CBD sales, the encouraging point here is that in dispensary, so this is separate data from Headset, this is MSA tracking dispensary sales. The point here is that CBD and these dispensaries represent about 4% of their business. So consumers that had the opportunity of buying CBD items in their regular class of trade, the convenience class of trade, the tobacco outlet class of trade, they still preferred to buy it there. So when they went to dispensaries, they weren't necessarily looking for CBD. They trusted their conventional class of trades, the convenience stores, the drug stores, the tobacco outlets, the vape shops, to purchase their CBD. That's one thing to read from here. I'm going to go through all of this pretty quickly. Now, MSA has done a lot of research on the use of cannabis and CBD in the treatment of an opioid use disorder. And here's what some of the things that we found out. When consumers use CBD cannabis, here's the reasons they say for that. So this is combined. But I want to call your attention to, as it's down the line there, but consumers that really use it for treatment of addictions, that type of thing. And you can see that's similar here as well. Opioid addiction actually comes out in this. When we ask the percent of people who use cannabis to treat medical condition, 1.3% are using it for opioid. We think that would increase. The reason being, and this is for both cannabis and CBD, the reason that's important is that this can mean something for business. If it becomes recognized as a treatment for that, and we know how prevalent the opioid addiction is in our country, this can be very big for the CBD business. Has a great deal of potential. We really look through many things, and when you after the presentation today, you're able to download this. I think you have to do a survey and then you can download this. You can go through this. We've made some really important points on this, but you can go through how in some areas, such as Canada and others, CBD cannabis is being recognized as an effective treatment for the opioid use disorder, and in fact, far more so than the three four prescription drugs that are on the marketplace today. This also sort of explains what's happening in the U.S. and Canada. Canada was sort of a little bit in front of us in terms of being able to use CBD and cannabis for the purposes of treatment of the OUD. Here's also a little bit more on the vaping crisis and what happened there. Download this and you can see sort of the situation that developed there and how it impacted CBD and what we showed you in the results today. All right, what are some key findings and takeaways? Total U.S. nicotine volumes were down slightly, right? This through third quarter. We expected to pick up. If anybody heard the Altria call today, you saw that fourth quarter was actually better. It was only a minus 4.5% decline. We do think that you're going to see some good results from cigarettes this coming year, at least not as bad as it has been in the past. Cigarette decline expected to moderate in 2020, as I mentioned. Tobacco retailers need to keep close eye on the category in 2020. I don't think I need to tell you that, but who knows what's going on in your area with menthol or the age 21 purchase restriction. What will that mean for your business? Vapor category may show surprising strength in 2020. It's not all doom and gloom. We have seen some reactions from consumers that suggest they'll use, their preferences may change. They will use what's on the marketplace. And later in 2019, C-store CBD sales experienced a downturn due to the THC vaping crisis, but we saw a very recent strengthening in that business, a return to that business. Very quickly as well in terms of CBD, Google searches really suggesting very strong intent for CBD purchases. Dispensaries have a lot of product and useful information for retailers. Recovery from vape crisis in dispensaries was far more rapid than in C-stores. It's coming to C-stores, it's coming to tobacco outlets. CBD cannabis demonstrates a strong appeal to adults for reduction of pain and other wellness. Treat this item as you would any kind of health and wellness product in your stores. Health-driven reasons for CBD purchase are key factors for retailers, and CBD products have been adopted faster by younger consumers. That's your consumer for these products. Okay, I'm going to stop there in terms of key findings. Let me open the floor to any questions that anybody might have. That was a lot of data. I'm sorry to go through that so fast. I think Bob has a mic if anybody has a question. Yeah, I think there's a question back there, Bob.
I'm scared to use the mic. Okay, here. Earlier you had mentioned that the main reason for taking CBD products is chronic pain, or one of the main reasons.
Right.
But the demographics suggest that the young consumers are the highest demographic
Right.
that consume CBD products. And that the most, to me, if I'm thinking chronic pain, I'm thinking over 55 years old.
Yep.
Which is interesting because that's definitely not what the consumer demographic would suggest.
Yep.
I would like your thoughts on that because I am a CBD producer and I want to target the over 55 crowd.
Yep. So when we talked about the ideal consumer, those that are likely to approve of the product, these are the people that are most likely to have very positive feelings toward both CBD and cannabis today. The over 55 crowd, and you're right, would be those that would typically be more likely to have chronic pain. They are users. They're just not as likely to be favorable, but they are the user for chronic pain. Keep in mind, I showed the 4 or 5 reasons. One of them was chronic pain. The other one was temporary pain, which can be experienced by anyone. The other one was to fight stress and anxiety. That's also can be a younger person, be affected by that as much as an older person. And the feeling of just wellness and health, all that is more a youthful kind of feeling as well in general. So you should not stop by trying to promote your products to those with chronic pain, because you can see it's one of the top users. They are just not as likely to be favorable in terms of their perceptions of CBD and cannabis as a younger person is. But that doesn't mean that is not a very good audience for those products, because it is used for chronic pain. So I would just look at it a little bit differently in the way that you were interpreting that. I think it's actually encouraging in terms of that usage. Yeah, I think there's a question over here, Bob. Oh, maybe one back there too.
Thank you for the presentation, really great info.
You're welcome.
Your data might not be this granular, but I wonder if you could comment generally about what you think is going to happen to open systems post-May. Hard question maybe. But.
Well, here's what I think. I think they'll actually continue to be very strong in vape shops, and that's the reason I showed you that results of the vape shop survey. But you know what? It will probably skew more closely to the major liquid manufacturers. So you'll see a skewing of the results, because they're the only ones who will likely be able to afford to do a PMTA and therefore keep their products on the market beyond May 12th. So because that will be going to the major manufacturers, major liquid manufacturers, I think there will be a shift in sort of market share among the major manufacturers of those liquids, but I think it will continue to be very strong in the vape shops. That's going to continue. That has been the foundation of the vape shop business since we've been tracking it. I think it'll continue to be it, and because it's allowed with flavors today, except for that PMTA requirement in May, that will only allow them to shift to the major manufacturers. And that's one of the reasons I showed that Juul slide, because I think the vape shops are starting to catch on. They've got to start skewing their products toward those manufacturers that are going to be able to survive the PMTA type requirement. I actually don't. I think the vape shops will continue to be strong. I think open systems will continue to be very strong in the vape shops. I think the question is, what will happen with open systems within the traditional classes of trade, which typically were dropped because they believed the closed systems would be safer? Now what happens? So I actually think that may be the more interesting question going on this year, is what happens in the conventional class of trade with open systems. I think in vape shops, it will continue to be very strong. It will continue to be the foundation of their business. Yeah.
Thank you, yes. I have two questions. You had showed a slide with moist snuff tobacco down, I'll call it 1%.
Right.
I'm curious within that, does that include the modern oral, because that seems to be pulling away from the Copenhagen's and Skulls of the world, but I'm curious what's included in your data there.
Yep. So there were two reasons for that 1.3% decline. Modern oral is one of them. So as we see modern oral growing, and it's a very similar type usage, right, to moist, modern oral was not included in those results. That were only moist figures. But modern oral, we're going to be doing a study as to where the source of business for modern oral products. It's a little too early yet to be doing, to be conducting a reasonable analysis. But we believe some of it probably is coming from moist, right? So that might be part of the reason for that 1.3% decline as modern oral continued to grow. The other thing that I was showing you, these were distributor shipments into retail locations. There are a few returns this past year on moist products. So because of that returns, that diminished it a little bit as well. So that's the reason for the 1.3% decline, which is a little bit unique in that category. We do think in 2020, you saw it's really going to flatten out and not see a decline.
I had one other quick one if I could, which
Yep.
is in relation to vapor. It seemed to be in one of your slides a direct correlation between vapor goes up and cigarettes go down. There's kind of a clear correlation there. So there's a lot going on in vapor this year. The PMTA is due in May, for example, a lot of shakeup in what's carried in a convenience store.
Right.
Do you expect that category to grow and therefore, vapor that is, and
Yep.
if it declines because of all this shakeup, could you see cigarettes do even better? And you've alluded to that. I'm just curious if that's one of the reasons why.
So yeah, two things on that. So yes, we do think that cigarettes are going to do better next year. And we do think this vaping crisis that occurred did hurt vape somewhat. And you saw that the growth, still growing, but not growing at quite the levels that it had been in the past. It impacted vapor. Some of those consumers, and typically what we find, the combustible consumer is a dual user of both combustibles and vape. So we see a lot of dual usage. We think that dual usage may have declined somewhat with vape. But keep in mind, tobacco will still be offered in terms of vape, right? Vape can still offer pods and closed systems with tobacco flavors. That's typically the gateway flavor, someone going from combustibles to vape. So there's a lot of offsetting considerations that are going to happen this next year. That's the reason we feel that actually combustibles will benefit somewhat from the movement from vape back to combustibles because of the crisis that occurred this past year. But at the same time, because the gateway flavor to getting into vape is still tobacco and still in the market, we still think there'll be some consumers that will do it. So we still see vape growing, just not at the rate that it has been in the past, and we see that lower growth rate helping combustibles. So that's why we're projecting the 4.5% to 5.5% decline in combustibles, and we're projecting less of a growth rate in vapor, but still a growth rate, because we still think, and we have seen, and I'm sure retailers had a lot of concerns over the loss of flavors. But we have seen, I didn't show it, but we had another chart that showed when the flavors were taken off the marketplace, mostly due to Juul, taken off the marketplace, mint went right up. Consumers just moved to mint. Okay, mint now comes off. You actually notice at the time that flavors went off, that actually tobacco and menthol also grew. Not anywhere near the growth rate in mint, but grew as well. With mint coming off the marketplace, keep in mind, consumers are likely, they adjust their taste to what's available for them to get. I really think it's not going to impact vapor quite as much as people believe. I really think you're going to find that consumers are willing then to go the tobacco or menthol flavors, moving from mint to those flavors, particularly menthol, which is fairly similar as well. The other thing that I'll just say is most of the flavors that are offered in both tobacco and menthol by the vape companies typically have an underlying flavor as well that tends to provide just an enhancement flavor, whether it's vanilla or whatever it is. So it's not quite, so there is some flavor to it as well. It's not as big of a change to go from mango flavor to strict tobacco because it's not quite tobacco yet. So I don't think it's going to be as devastating on vapor as maybe thought it would be. Yeah.
I was going to ask how you saw the hemp cigarettes replacing
Yes.
tobacco cigarettes trend going into the future.
Okay, so Here's the thing. Hemp cigarettes do not contain nicotine, and the consumer that chooses to use nicotine is going to go for a nicotine product. I actually think that modern oral is going to see a lot of an uptick. You know, if you look at the category today, the two that I showed you that were growing were vape and modern oral. The consumer, we need to keep an eye on that, because the consumer that chooses to use nicotine may be moving away from tobacco, right? Now I'll talk about hemp in a minute. Maybe moving a little away from tobacco, but still is choosing nicotine. The hemp cigarette does not offer that nicotine. Here's what I've heard. Hemp cigarettes are still very small, and we're not seeing them being tracked in our data, but I have heard from several retailers that that is one of their top items. So I actually think we're going to be seeing more of that, and I think over this next year we'll see what happens there, but I don't think there will be a lot of interaction. I think in terms of CBD consumption, hemp cigarettes are going to grow as a share of the CBD market, but I don't think you're going to see it interacting much with a nicotine item, with a nicotine product, just because consumers want nicotine when they purchase a nicotine item, you know? Yeah. Anything else? Great. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate you listening. Appreciate your time.